Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are back now. I believe this is our third episode back to our normal schedule, and we've got kind of a crazy mix of stuff. We're going to talk about what do you want to call it? With the rumors about President Trump's relative lack of appearances before the public. A lot of these things, things in the Trump era, it's a little hard to know whether they are rumors and possibilities as opposed to sort of like viral memes and games, right? The Times ran had a story that said something like, the internet thought President Trump was dead. Turns out he's not dead. Again, this is something about the unreality of the Trump world that very weird things can happen and do happen. There's also this sense that, again, a lot of the Trump thing is play acting, and people around him start doing play acting, and his opponents start doing play acting, right? And I don't know how closely listeners you were following this. It was kind of strange that for a normal president not to have a public availability for 4 or 5 days wouldn't be terribly strange. For Donald Trump, it's pretty strange. It's pretty strange. He wants to be on the camera and talking and visible and holding the stage all the time. It's also true we have had a number of things that suggests that there's some health issues the president's having that aren't terribly surprising for like an 80-year-old man. I mean, someone that's 80, you have different things going on with your body. You've got these he's got these bruises on his hands. He has the ankle swelling that they said is from this, I think it's, chronic venous insufficiency or something like that. Something that, at least as described to us, is a not uncommon thing for older men to have, and in itself is not not the biggest deal in the world. But we're going to get into that because it just becomes part of the fanfare and perpetual weirdness of the Trump era. And also in the sense that you do have this backdrop that we have spent, the parts of the year that we have not spent with Donald Trump holding the national stage and yelling about everything, yelling at everybody, yelling about himself, yelling. We have been lectured about the reckoning over Joe Biden and the press's reckoning and the Democrats' reckoning and your personal reckoning and all this stuff. And then we have, the current guy who is actually the oldest person ever to become president. I don't know, showing up with like pancake makeup smeared on his hand and all these kind of weird things. And there's nothing. Right. It's it's very strange. Apparently, it doesn't apply when it comes to Donald Trump. So we're going to get into that and into other issues. Kate, you're down there in occupied Washington D.C. What did you make of all this?
Well, it was funny. I was saying before we started recording, my little sister texted me, "Is Trump dead?" And I was like, "No way. This is how I'm going to find out." And so I went online, and it's funny because the kind of I saw some. It sounded similar to what you said in the New York Times. I think it was Playbook that was like this very kind of credulous, like the Trump hating corners of the internet convinced themselves that he was dead, and it's like it's why you're saying this thing that we have all become so ironic that it's kind of impossible to detach the irony from credulity. It's just kind of baked in. So, a lot of this stuff online, like I'm
Or
sure
from
there were some.
taunting, or from taunting?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. I mean, I'm sure there was some amount of like, tinfoil hats who really convinced themselves, but like almost everything I saw was either mockery or kind of self mockery of like how bad they wanted it to be true,
right, right, right.
Um, but I think I mean, it brings up what you alluded to, which is he is really old and he never suffered the same way that Biden did because he didn't have the same visible drop in energy,
Yeah,
right? Biden started shuffling his feet when he walked. He got really whispery. He had just all of these tangible signs of aging
yep.
that Trump has largely avoided to have. In which some of these physical things are, I think, little breakages in that wall that has kind of protected him from being so old so far.
Or it's like the Matrix, right? That when you have like a glitch in the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Because the Matrix is that I think even many of his most uh, ardent enemies do have this sense of, he's this evil Superman, kind of like that. Because Trump, one thing you cannot take away from him is he's energetic in the sense of he's yelling and he's doing stuff and he's trying to grab the stage and everything. That part is true. He's up, he's walking around, he's doing all these things. And I think that was the kind of thing you see these things with like the bruising and stuff. And you're like, wait a second. Oh, yeah, he's 80. And 80 is old. It's, a lot of people are vigorous in their 80s, but 80 is old. And he's, I don't know, he's been on the McDonald's diet for what, 60 years? I mean, 80 years, but as a grown up. So there's a lot of stuff that you look at it, and he's probably not in. You have the additional fact that, like, whenever we have gotten um health reports on him, you've got these things that, like, they report a weight that is, like, obviously not true. And, like, if you know if you're operating like that, you gotta kind of, I don't know, put the cholesterol number in a certain kind of uncertainty and everything. So yeah, it is a bit like glitch in the Matrix. And I will say that, like, there was someone it was actually this one of these former kind of right-wing Republicans turned resistancer, saying how, a big part of Trump's power is his just joking thing. Just joking. He's just joking, you know, to do these things. And uh, it reminded me that is a central part of his power, a central part of how he pulls a lot of the stuff he's doing off. And what reminds me there is a lot of what we are seeing right now. It's not that, oh, it's still the Bush Republican Party and Donald Trump is just kind of taking it over. the current Republican Party likes this stuff, but the ability to impose this stuff is heavily dependent on the person of Donald Trump. And so when we hear stuff about his age, when we hear he's kind of, not making public appearances for a few days, it reminds us that that not only is the health of a president always a big deal, but it's particularly a big deal because, I mean, what we know, it's a cult of personality.
Right. And so I think it won't be as sticky as it was with Biden because it just so dogged his every public
Mhm, mhm.
demonstration. And then he couldn't really give any public remarks, which is obviously pretty fatal for a president.
Yep,
But
yep,
the extent to which there is breakthrough on this stuff, I think Democrats should talk about it more. I think they shouldn't, do this thing where they act like it's kind of like uncouth to mention how old he is, right? A turnabout's fair play at the very least. Um, and there's this other side of it, which Brian Boyler had a Substack about this that I thought was pretty interesting, which was the idea of like, okay, but we should be kind of prepared for if he does die in office and what the response will be. And he said, and I think this is totally right, you can already predict what elected Democrats are going to do, right? You're going to have cities and liberal enclaves are going to be an all-out celebration, jubilation,
right.
which is, I think, the correct response to a president who has made abundantly clear that one of his main goals in office is to punish you specifically and to make your life worse. Like, that's a pretty normal response. So, all those places are going to celebrate. Fox News and the mainstream media are going to be doing the kind of like pearl clutching of, you didn't have to vote for him, but he's your president, whatever kind of stuff. And I think that elected Democrats, this is what Boiler said, and I totally agree, they're going to do some kind of like, while we didn't always get along, respect that the office is earned, and we'll probably go to the funeral, right? And do some kind of like mealy mouthed version of like pseudo mourning because they think that like swing state voters will find it distasteful to not kind of wrist slap the people who are like out popping champagne in the streets kind of thing. And it's important because for a few reasons, one of which is the legacy piece, right? Like, that the right is immediately going to sanctify Trump, and at the very very least we can't allow that to happen to someone who has been this dangerous and destructive. But also, the biggest question mark for the Republican Party going forward, as you alluded to, is what happens without Trump. Like, it's a very uneasy coalition, as we've talked about before. There is not a lot of ideological consistency beyond kind of owning libs. That you've got kind of, we've talked about this on the show before, but if the religious right, the kind of nascent tech bro online culture, whatever's left of kind of old school Republicans, like none of these people really have priorities in common. They just all really liked Trump. And so avoiding this kind of like stupid consultant tested like, I will still show respect to the office kind of reaction from Democrats, I think is actually pretty important, because you'd expect it to be quite a fragile moment for the Republican coalition as they kind of figure out how to hang together going forward, and whether President JD Vance is a compelling enough personality to fill that void. So apart from the kind of the jokes and the memes, I do think it's something we should be thinking about, because I think if he does die in office, that's going to be a delicate moment for Republicans and a potentially kind of powerful opening for Democrats to make a new case for themselves that is not just kind of purely anti-Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have one thing from what you said is we should remember that owning the libs is an idiomatic way we have of expressing punishment. That the uniting ideological focus of the modern Republican Party is punishment, is retribution and domination, which is, uh, you know, I'm not the hugest fan of the word in this context, but is fascism. right? I mean, owning the libs is a mimetic version of the fascist impulse that unites the current Republican Party. I do think that, again, that kind of intuitive grasp of showmanship and media, of drama, is very central to this, and JD Vance does not have it. He's a dork, and he is, that is not just an insult in this case. He is a kind of nebbishy person who, when he tries to walk that walk, seems stupid and laughable. Um, we may laugh at Trump, but Trump isn't laughable in that way. He's a Vance is an object of derision. My own take on these things is, I mean, if I were in that, position as an elected official, you know, and some of this is just characterological, is not political, but it's how I would approach it. Kind of like, I never celebrate when someone dies because they have family members. It's sad for them. They lose someone in their family and whatever. But Donald Trump was a terrible president and a dangerous president. And his passing does not change that fact. He was a threat to the liberty of all Americans. And that, to me, would be sort of the sweet spot. Kind of like our best wishes to his family. But we're not wrapping him into the sort of the fabric of the American family, because he is a deeply dangerous, anti-democratic person who threatened the liberty of everyone. And I totally agree with you that in practice, what there would also be is you would have Vance and whoever the congressional leaders were at the time, trying to pass a bunch of legislation under the guise of it got to pull together in this moment, and let's pull together and actually abolish the NIH in this moment when the nation has to pull together and stuff. And that's where you want to say, actually, no. Donald Trump was trying to overthrow the American Republic, and if I were a minority leader, I might show up to the funeral, sort of ex officio. And people disagree with that. I mean, I'm not saying that's this is just my personal thing, but I'd show up and still say danger to the country. You know, uh, but I agree. It's something that everyone has to prepare for, because how can you not prepare for it? Anybody who has an 80-year-old relative knows that they are very old, right? It's just, again, it's part of that matrix that we talked about, that, again, even his fiercest enemies, kind of, you to look at him, you're like, he's a force of nature. He'll never die. That's not the case.
But alas, he is still alive. So, we'll shelve that for the future. But I want to talk a little bit about Congress is back now. They got back yesterday for the most part. The government funding runs out on September 30th. It is even messier than usual because the White House unveiled its pocket rescission gambit shortly, I guess last week, 2 weeks ago, recently, where they'd been telegraphing this for a while, but they announced basically that rather than even ask Republicans to vote on it this time, they are just going to have the president unilaterally zero out funding that Congress has already allocated that they don't want to spend. They're going after foreign aid more. This is clearly the recurring topic that they think the public won't, object to as much as some other areas of spending that poll better. So that's in the mix, which just kind of adds on the pressure for Democrats, because how could they possibly go along with this, right? Like, even if Republicans try to do a bipartisan appropriations process, which only really seems to be happening at all in the Senate, the House is kind of operating off we're moving right to the continuing resolution plan, which is what the White House wants. They want a year-long CR, the better to kind of remove even more power from Congress. But now Democrats are going to have to decide, are they going to let the government shut down? Because their votes are needed no matter what they do, right? And we saw what happened in March when Schumer helped keep the government open. Probably one of the lowest moments for Democrats that I've seen, kind of idiosyncratically. Go ahead.
Oh, so certainly the lowest moment in terms of that was when the morale fell through,
Yeah.
like the bottom dropped out in terms of morale. Can you explain to us what makes this a pocket rescission? Is it that that you kind of you do it when the budgeting the other continuing resolution is running? What are the mechanic? What makes it a pocket rescission?
Yeah, so it's, like, so stupid, but to pretend like it makes any sense at all, basically, the president can ask Congress, "Hey, I actually want this money clawed back for X, Y, and Z." And the idea is that freezes that funding for 45 minutes while Congress basically that time is supposed to be so they can deliberate, right? And if they want to take it back, they can decide to take it back. But if the 45-day period ends and Congress hasn't acted, then it's kind of like, all right, tough beans, Mr. President. This money is going to be spent as expected. So Russ Vogt, who's kind of leading this charge, thinks that if you run out the clock on the end of the fiscal year and put in this presidential request less than 45 days out, that it basically that freeze on the money extends in perpetuity. So no matter what Congress does, you just have used this weird trick of timing to zero out that money. It's just really stupid. Like, no one in the
So
whole
in
world
their
thinks
theory
that's
is
how it works.
the 45 days becomes eternal. And
Exactly, right.
right, so it's a kind of a yeah. All right. So
And it's
that's what we mean by when they call it at least pocket rescission.
right.
Okay.
And I mean, who knows? We don't have to get into it. I mean, I read a good thing by Matt Glassman today about how you get stuck in the kind of particulars of the law here because that's the only grounds on which the left can fight this kind of stuff. But it is so myopic in terms of the bigger picture here because we can get into the impoundment control act and how that law was obviously not passed with this in mind and the history of presidents trying to impound stuff, but then you just take a step back and you're like, they are asserting that despite the fact that Congress is supposed to be in charge of the money and that like the founders were very explicit about how that would defang a potential tyrant to not be in control of the money, that using this one weird trick, doctors hate her, you can somehow circumvent that and just unilaterally cancel out any money you don't want to spend. I mean, it's like totally ridiculous.
Now, you mean Glassman said like the left can only because that's those are the terms they think in that Democrats think and
Well,
or
since you have
that
to fight in court, you have
right,
to fight a textualist argument on the face of the law. But that if
right.
you take one step back and you have any knowledge at all of how our system works, you don't have to get into the nitty gritty phraseology of the Impoundment Control Act. Any first grader knows a president doesn't get to control the money, right? That's just basic. But you have to fight on the kind of the statutory grounds because that's all that's available to you.
Right. So he is conceding that as a to get into court and to get courts to intervene, the stepping back for big picture is irrelevant.
Exactly. You
He's not
almost
saying that
like
they're doing something wrong by not looking at the big
yeah.
picture.
You almost have to, like, give this silly theory more credence than it's due, right? Because you
Right.
have to kind of pick apart the argument, whereas, like, the obvious reaction is just like, "Well, that's insane." So, no, that's not how it works, you know?
Right. I guess I do. I mean, one thing that I think we see coming up again and again is that one has to you can't get the opposition cannot take too much ownership of the arguments that their lawyers are making in court because you need to work the court angle as much as you can. Um, but the reality is that, we come back to this point. This is fundamentally a political fight and a fight over public opinion. And it's like the stuff that you've got the Texas National Guard is going to invade Chicago. Uh, the fact that someone might, and that is very uncertain, might be able to come up with with some weird codicil of the law that you're like, wow, I guess maybe that kind of allows is irrelevant. Our system, we do not have one state's National Guard occupying another one. That is not part of the deal, and that's what you have to focus on.
Exactly.
Your supporters are invading our state, and we will not stand for it. We will resist it. It's unconstitutional. The courts do not own the Constitution. This is something. This gets to a broader argument about Democrats and the center left's infatuation with the Supreme Court. That is kind of born of this period in the 1950s and the first half of the 1960s, basically, when the court actually was expanding rights kind of for everyone, right? And in theory, you can sort of say that that goes from the late 30s until maybe as long as the early 1970s. But regardless of how you measure it, it's a very short period of time in the span of American history, in which the Supreme Court has almost always been a retrograde force. And there is a whole there's a whole theory of the Constitution from the past that each branch has to interpret the Constitution and make constitutional judgments on its own. And there may be, when it comes up in judicial proceedings, the Supreme Court has standing in those cases, but that's not the same as they own it. And the idea that they own it is what has enabled where we are now, where you've got these things come up where there's not even really a case, right? Where they say, well, okay, well, now we have the major questions doctrine, and now we have presidential immunity. Well, no, not really. like all that is just complete bullshit. In any case, to your point about we can't get held up on the ins and outs of some theory that Roosevelt came up with. The Congress is in charge of the budget. If the president can come up with, as you said, kind of one crazy trick to just he's in charge of the budget, that's unconstitutional. It doesn't matter what theory you come up with.
Exactly. So, and it adds another layer of just kind of farce to the whole budget, process, because as of before last week, Democrats knew that if they participated in the appropriations process, if they gave their votes to these budget bills, Republicans might afterwards vote on rescissions to take back some of that compromise, some of the concessions given to Democrats in exchange for their votes, and that they could do that on a simple majority. So Democrats didn't have to help them. That meant that any deal they make is just completely whatever the opposite of ironclad is, right? Everything can be dragged back.
Yeah.
Now that you take that dynamic and even intensify it, because now Republicans don't even have to agree to vote for it. Donald Trump can just choose whatever Democratic concessions he doesn't like and rip them out himself. So to me, the big question now is kind of what do Democrats do? And I just think the combination of how authoritarian things have gotten with these occupations of liberal cities, on top of the fact that you can have no assurance whatsoever as a Democrat that your vote isn't just being abused in this process, there's no way you can vote for it. I think you have to shut down our government, or, let it be shut down or whatever, and gird yourself for the fact that Republicans will try to blame you, that right-wing media will try to blame you, that mainstream media will try to blame you, and you just have to sit there and say, "We'll help fund the government just as soon as X," right? Just as soon as you get federal troops out of blue cities, right? Or you restore the Medicaid cuts or whatever it is. And we talked about this last time. And part of the reason why last time was such a shit show is like Schumer said, we're going to fight, right? And then caved 48 hours later. But even in that, 5 minutes where it seemed like they were going to fight, they had never coalesced behind a list of easily actionable demands. And I just hope that they've kind of learned from that lesson a little bit and make some kind of, I keep going back to like Mom Donnie about this. I think what was so brilliant about his campaign is there were like three things and he just said them all the time. And it was just those three like specific things that touched on greater concerns, but like three bullet points. And I think that's what Democrats have to do. And something like the occupation of the cities, that's visible, it's visceral, right? You would get some immediate payoff when you see kind of National Guards like loading themselves back into buses. So it could be an iterative news story for them as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
But at this point, I just see like no upside to participating, to doing business as usual. And I think in some ways it's just lending legitimacy to an administration that at this point is just, it's like, it's not really our federal government anymore because Congress is no longer an operable branch.
Yeah, I think some another reader mentioned this to me, and this one is tough, but it really resonated with me. That what she had heard was the thing is going to be the Obamacare subsidies. You give us the Obamacare subsidies, and that will win their votes. Now, you've got the basic point, like bring them back till when? Till the next rescission, right? But also, uh, let's be honest about this. This is the Republicans' big self-inflicted wound. That is the part of their bill that is going to hit hard before the midterm elections. So really what you're doing is giving the White House an opportunity to get its own ass out of the fire on what it did so that it can possibly hold on to the Congress and make everything's 25 times worse in 2027. So and is this cynical? Maybe, but like that's where we are. And I think what I would say is you should do this. This is going to hurt everybody. You should do it. We're not going to give you anything for doing it because you should do it. You do it
Yep.
on your own. What our condition is, I think you're right about the things in pulling the military out of the cities. Yes, he could, he's the president. He can't really bind himself. However, if he does that and then does the same thing again, it'll be clear he is his it's still worth doing because it will show the nature of his lawlessness, that there is no deal he will respect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are various ways you could that you could codify it. They're relying on these kind of ambiguities in the law. Again, the one what is, I can't remember the meme phrase for it. One crazy trick. You could, as part of a deal, revise the law and say these crazy tricks do not work. So you could get something there. You could also get them to uh, you know amend the Impoundment Act to put something there that says you can't do these rescissions. Those things are real. Um, could they be? Could he do something else lawless? Sure, but I mean those things are real, and those are worth doing. And to your point about seeing everybody pack up and leave, it's also an expression of power because he does not want to pull those troops out of those cities. if you get him to do that, that will be you allow the opposition to say, we put our foot down and he had to do something that was painful for him. And that sort of puts them on the map. So I don't know, just they need a lot of pressure about what's necessary here. And certainly giving the White House, which, as we know, only cares about the politics, right? They'd probably see it as a joke on the Democrats to push that, push those Obamacare subsidy things, back to the end of 2026. You have to do something, or otherwise you're powerless, and you are an object of ridicule to your supporters and your opponents.
And another enforcement mechanism with this stuff could be short-term CRs, right? Say you have our votes for 2 months or whatever, right? So if
Hmm.
he tries to put troops back, you say, "Okay, sorry, tough." Like, I
Yep.
just it can be done. It could be done well. It could be done in a really, I think, powerful way that could kind of kick off at the federal level this appetite for fight, the model that's being demonstrated by some of the governors. Um, and the risk to me seems so low because, what they'll say is, well, we don't want to get blamed for the shutdown, right? Like, we don't want to kind of undo the natural pendulum swing back to the left for the midterms. But as you
Hmm.
say, that leaves you in a spot where you're contemplating helping Republicans out, shoring up their footing before the midterms. The Democrat the Democratic leadership is always in this posture of doing nothing is less risky. And I think we've just reached a point where that is not really true. Like, they're the least popular they ever have been. That is risk. And, like, does
Hmm.
fighting have some risk? Does shutting down the government have some risk? Yeah, of course. But I just think you can't comply. I don't think you can. I think acting like this is kind of normal course of business and lending your votes and lending your credibility to it is just unacceptable at the point that, I have like 50 armed guards walking around my neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, and I think um, the key part of this, in my mind, is that when you look at why are the Democrats, institutional Democrats, unpopular? Trump's super unpopular, but why are what is the root of Democrats' unpopularity? It's not about trans issues, and it's not about wokeness or stuff like that. Those issues may have played some role in the 2024 election, but those are people don't bring those things up. What they bring up is they're useless. They don't actually get anything done. They have no ability to use power. They're irrelevant. And that's yeah. I mean, that's kind of true. So the idea that um, it is the lack of fight that is the issue, right? And people, so it's one of those things where if the unpopularity was from something else, there might be an argument. Let's just let the pendulum swing. Let's not get into it over God, I don't know. What if what if this was a budget fight about uh, you know trans athletes? Something where the Republicans do have some leverage, do have some traction. You can say, we're going to win next year. Why get in the way? But the one thing that is a threat to that win, or a threat to the scale of the win, is the lack of fight. So it doesn't even, it doesn't even make sense on its own terms. And even, like, frankly, the government shutdown thing, a lot of the government is shut down. It's permanently shut down, right? You're talking, normally you're talking about things like, oh, the national parks are going to be closed. They're like half closed as it is. They're like understaffed. There's lots of things. It is literally the case. It's half shut down. So it is, even on its own terms, the let's not rock the boat, which sometimes is a good argument, right? Why get in the way of our backlash win? The one threat is you guys are irrelevant. Voting for you doesn't matter because you don't actually do anything. So it's bad.
Totally. And just to kind of add on that piece you said at the end, I remember a big argument against the shutdown in March was some Democrats said it would make it easier to shut down big swaths of the government.
Yeah.
And maybe that was like a fine argument then, but now you're like, it's pretty easy. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
seem to be proving very difficult so far. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that.
Another part of that equation is there was that window where, I guess it was 2 days till they finally made the vote, but there was the moment where Schumer goes to the floor and says, "Fuck this. The answer's no." And everybody's like, "Wow. Wow, okay.
Hmm.
Misjudged this guy." And I remember I was talking to some sources, and pretty quickly I got hold of some people like, "Dude, no. We're gonna fold in about 24 hours." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? Are you like it's not that I'm surprised you're gonna fold, but why did he do that? You made it so much worse.
That was
You made it so much worse."
that was some of the most shopping political malpractice I've ever
Yeah,
seen,
yeah,
honestly, just
yeah,
from a
yeah.
pure optics standpoint.
Totally, totally, totally. And I remember as clear as day, the people, and these are people who are kind of, high level staffers in the mix, and maybe they kind of know, like, yeah, we should fight, but they're also enough part of the power structure that they can say we are not going to fight, and also we actually can't fight. And they are, and what they were saying was, we're hitting this cold. We haven't decided on anything to fight for. We haven't prepared any message for this. So we can't. So we literally cannot. We are hitting this cold. And it's sort of like, and I certainly am not the only one, but I was one of many people saying 6 weeks before, you have to draw the line now. We're going to fight over these things, because if you hit it cold, you're not going to be able to stick to it. It's not even just a matter of you're not tough enough. You need to decide what you're doing, before you show up for day one at the office. And it just, it is still sort of a traumatic memory for me, because I'm like, what the actual fuck? Like, what the actual fuck? Like, yeah, I guess you are hitting, but why the fuck are you hitting it cold? And like, maybe we're about to hit it cold again.
Right. As if you didn't know this was coming, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing
yeah.
that was so infuriating about the first time and which is inexcusable about this time. There's a lot that happens in politics that you can't anticipate, and that is a surprise. The budgetary schedule of the federal government is not one of those things. You know exactly when it's coming. You have ample time to prepare. And I think the only indication we've had one way or another, like we've gotten some letters from Schumer's and Jeffries that are like pretty disappointing and mealy mouthed, and we should be doing this bipartisan, whatever. But they've been like single handedly focused, I think sometimes to a pretty absurd degree, on healthcare stuff over
Mm-hmm.
recess. Like
Yep.
they did their big, we're going to have 800 events throughout the country, whatever. And if that is priming the pump for not helping on the subsidies, letting Republicans sow or reap what they sowed. And they were thinking that was kind of like priming the messaging to be all about healthcare. Like, you can quibble with that. This is what they're going to do, though. This is the ground they feel comfortable fighting on. So if that's the end goal, and it's going to be a shutdown headlined by healthcare pain caused by Republicans, fine, but it's hard to have a lot of confidence in this particular batch.
Well, and it's also if the idea is like, oh, we're going to talk about pain, but then we're going to take away all the pain. Like, okay, I'm not sure
Absurd.
that's a great outcome, because and this is why I think it's not cynical. You are not taking away the pain. You are delaying the pain by maybe 6 months to allow the Republicans to have a much better shot at holding the Congress. So you are not actually helping anybody, because it'll just be taken right back. So I don't know. I really don't know what people can do except, start calling their members of Congress and demanding some lines in the sand that do not amount to, helping Republicans have a better midterm showing. But
Yep, exactly.
time is short.
Hmm. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's talk about, we got a few pretty significant retirement announcements on the right in the past few days, one of which is Joni Ernst, the senator in Iowa, which had been telegraphed for quite some time, but she made it official. Um, Republicans got a pretty good recruit to replace her immediately, in Ashley Hinson, who is in the House. But Iowa has been one of the states that, it's a sign of how gruesome the Senate map is for Democrats, that that's one of the best pickup opportunities. So,
Right, right, right.
and now, even though I think Hinson is a pretty, she's not one of these like total right wing nut jobs that's incapable of winning a general election, but,
Right.
they've lost the incumbency advantage in an important
Yep.
state, right? So that's one of them. And then in Wisconsin, we had Rebecca Bradley, one of the conservative justices, announce that she will not seek reelection. And her statement was kind of funny. It was about how she can like fight for the right wing movement better outside the bench than on it, which is kind of like, you're like not actually supposed to say that as a judge, but like, okay, whatever. I mean, thanks for your
Yeah.
transparency, I guess.
Well, and also it's kind of
Um,
it is also false. Like, actually being in
yeah,
office is a much better
exactly.
way to fight for your movement than not being in office. I mean,
Exactly.
I guess in theory you could say that, well, maybe in the minority, but like obviously pushing them further into the minority is not going to help. So it's one of
Right.
these things where it kind of makes sense, because we've had a string of these wins. But I read in the articles when she made this announcement that the last four of five races, the Democrats have won. And
Hmm.
that's pretty
And
telling. And
if she wants to run for governor or something, it might also just be a calculation of like, this office is harder than some others I could get.
yeah, no, I mean, there's Wisconsin is a very funny state. I was For something else, I was looking at um their congressional delegation, which is obviously, as we know, like insanely gerrymandered. Maybe not quite as much as the state legislature was gerrymandered. You have it is though a it's a funny thing, because they have been they've been losing these court races, which on both sides are explicitly partisan now, as you say, right? They're
Hmm.
not they are notionally nonpartisan, but they have on both sides become fully partisan, as they should be, because it is fully partisan. um they've been winning those consistently, and yet it's still, you know the state legislature is still heavily gerrymandered, although that seems to be partly changing. Um, the um, uh, the federal districts are heavily gerrymandered. The state went for Trump, right? We can't forget that it's a swing state. It went for Trump. But if you're her, and this is where kind of everything kind of stitches back together. If there's a time when they are going to sort of shift the tide on these court races, it's not going to be in 2026. That's not going to. I mean, maybe the Democrats will have a great disappointment in 2026, but it's not going to be a bang up year for Republicans. There's simply no way. Trump is too unpopular. He may not be unpopular enough to do the things that for Democrats to get what they want, but it's not going to be a great year for running for Supreme Court in Wisconsin. And it also, these are two big Midwestern states, right? It's Iowa isn't sort of industrial Midwest the way that Wisconsin and Michigan and kind of Minnesota are. But there's also I don't remember the names, and the names aren't terribly important. But there was just this special election in Iowa a week or two ago where a Democrat won by, I think, more than 10 points in what is normally a reliably Trump, I believe it's state Senate district. And you always have we do need to be careful to remember that Democrats were doing well in special elections going into the 2024 election, right? And that didn't work out great. But these are special elections that are moving by big margins, and 2026 is not a general election. So this is what happens in waves. That one of the reasons they become waves is that a lot of people decide not to run, and then they make it harder for their party to hold on to those seats because they don't have the energy to fight what battle they might lose. So these things are telling, and those are two very important seats.
It's also just such a statement of where we are that Joni Ernst opposed Pete Hegseth's confirmation for like 5 minutes before caving and deciding it was fine. And
Yeah.
that's still enough of a betrayal that the pressure is such that the incumbent senator in maybe a slightly could be vulnerable seat has been basically chased out of her job. Like, God, the loyalty demanded on the right now is absolute.
Yeah. Well, we will see a lot of things happening, but that is also, and this is where I kind of, I don't know, I'm I it's hard for me to know where to come down on these things. That the backlash is likely pretty strong, and at the end of the day, we have a zero sum politics. You may if you are upset with Donald Trump and the Republicans, you actually don't have a lot of options other than to vote for the Democrats. Now, obviously, you cannot vote, but I think if you're actually upset and want to send a message, again, most people in not voting. A lot of people say they're not going to vote, and obviously in different settings, voter participation goes up or goes down. But to some extent, the current leadership may be able to fuck up constantly and still have big wins, just because the folks in power are that unpopular. But the other part of that is, I mean, we've seen this. We've seen this certainly with Republicans, that there's a government shutdown a year out from the election, a year plus out from the election. No one's thinking about that. It's ancient history. And I think what has actually never really sunk in for most of elite political opinion, and news commentator opinion, is that it hurts Republicans more because people intuitively know that Republicans are opposed to government services. And people intuitively know that Democrats are not opposed to government services. So it just doesn't land the same way. People aren't thinking like, man, Democrats, they don't think I care about getting my about the soup kitchens being open. That's so hard-hearted of them. No one believes that. Right? So I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence that they're not going to approach this in a really stupid way. That's kind of where we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I would not put safe money on anything that isn't just total capitulation.
yeah, or yeah. Or not even capitulation, just stupid and feckless. Some of this stuff isn't even like capitulation exactly. It's just it's just I don't know. It's something almost worse than capitulation. Just not doing anything. Yeah, just not doing anything. So this is I think we're going to leave everybody on kind of a bummer note, but
well, they've got like 27 days to surprise us. So there's your mission, Democrats, if for nothing else than to prove us wrong.
Yeah, I would it is definitely in the power of Democratic voters if they make their views clear enough to shift this. But it requires a lot of organizing, a lot of clarity, a lot of specifics about what's necessary. And yeah, that's where we are. So,
all right.
I guess that is all we have for this week.
See you next Wednesday.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.